Okay, we are recording. So welcome to the Route 66 Spirit of America Museum. I am Stephen Brandt, and this is Marilyn Hudson. And this is our inaugural podcast interview. Thank you for watching. And Marilyn, why don't you help the folks get to know you a bit? How did you come to be you? And thank you for again being the first podcast interview.
Well, thank you. Well, let's see. My story is long and boring. No, I was born in the great state of Kansas, where they're famous for sunflowers and wheat. And I was, my father worked for Boeing Industries in Wichita, and we lived in a little town just south of there called Wellington. It was a very normal and boring small town, but I loved it. It was wonderful. But there weren't a lot of hopes and aspirations in life.
Okay.
It was kind of expected that if you were a girl, you'd just grow up, you'd get married, you'd have kids, and that would be it. And I wasn't adverse to that, but I did love to learn new things, and I loved exploring science. At one point, I remember playing in the backyard, and I was going to be a rockologist. You know, I didn't know that there was a word called geology.
You just liked rocks.
I liked rocks, so I was going to be a rockologist.
Awesome.
And so I just loved it. You know, that was one of my favorite things, was just going out and playing in the great outdoors and just enjoying and exploring things. Oh yes, loved that. And it wasn't until I was watching TV one night and I encountered this new show. My brother had told me about it, said it was really good and I should watch it. And so here it was, and I decided I'd watch it.
And that show was?
Star Trek.
I'll be darned.
And so I watched it, and it was a wonderful episode where that they have gone to this planet and they're finding that these miners are being killed or hurt by this great big rock monster.
Yes.
And come to find out, it wasn't a rock monster, it was just another alternate form of life.
It was.
And that was just so inspiring to me. I loved seeing all of these men and women running around this spaceship, doing things, exploring the great unknown, because I'd go out in my yard and I'd look up, and of course, you know, southern Kansas in the 1960s, all you saw were beautiful, beautiful star-filled skies at night.
Oh, I'm jealous.
Yeah, and so I quite often I found myself looking up there and wondering what was up there.
Wow.
The president had talked about sending a man to the moon, but that hadn't happened yet. We kept blowing our rockets up. But the dream was there. The hope, the aspiration was there that we as human beings might one day leave this planet and actually travel someplace else.
Someplace else.
And so Star Trek became my first big window on what life was outside of a small, no matter how pleasant, small Kansas town, to see what might be out there. What could I replace that rockology dream with, and those kinds of things. So
I can't get over the fact that the first episode you watched had a rock creature as its center. And you were already a rock
Yeah, can you see
person.
why I got hooked?
It's like that's not an accident. You know, everything happens for a reason. The first Star Trek episode that I saw was, I'm pretty sure, the premiere episode, which was a little more good versus evil, because some people on board the starship became influenced by some cosmic force, and they became super powerful, and their power kind of corrupted them, especially the man. Of course, no commentary necessary there, but definitely the lesson there was the corrupting influence of power.
That's
and in the end, of course, Kirk figures out how to defeat someone who's much stronger than him with the help of a woman. I cannot leave out that important part. which I'm delighted they included, because again, women matter.
That's right.
And
That's
one
right.
of the things that I enjoy showing people at the museum is that in the back I have the Wonder Woman theater room to make sure that women get their the attention
And
they
that is
deserve
so important.
in the
That is so
larger story.
important.
Well, thank you.
Theirs is half of the whole story.
Yes.
So, but other than that, then I went on, and some of that helped me to see beyond what I thought was my only future, and I ended up writing. I ended up going to college, even though I felt like I was a terrible student. I still ended up going to college and graduating and going on to get my master's degree. So I got an undergraduate degree in history from the University of Oklahoma, and then stayed around to get the Master of Library and Information Studies degree, also from the University of Oklahoma.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, I worked for 7 years. I worked for 10 years for the Metropolitan Library System in about 4 of their libraries.
That's fantastic.
And then I moved into the directorship of a university library in Bethany and was there for 7 years.
You directed a university library. Wow.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Very busy, very hectic. Never enough money.
Never enough money. But eager students, I would imagine.
But then as a result of that, and being around so many books and people who love books and encouraged writers, I had a secret dream, and in 2005, I published my very first book.
2005. Okay,
yeah. It was a children's picture book called "Elephant Hips Are Expensive."
Elephant hips are expensive. What's the...
And surprisingly, most women always think that I'm talking about real hips, But no, it was based on a 1947 event in Oklahoma City.
Yes.
Where the zoo wanted to buy a new elephant to replace their elephant who had died.
Oh.
And they wanted to bring this new elephant in, but they didn't have the upfront money. And so they encouraged school children to donate money. And these kids just fell to that, because a lot of these were the kids who had worked during World War II to gather scrap metal and do all kinds of stuff. They knew the importance of pitching in. And so they pitched in, and they did drives in their schools and did contests to be the class that gave the most from their school.
Yes, yes.
And finally they were able to turn over to the zoo money, so they were able to buy a new elephant. And that was how the much loved and well-known Judy the elephant came to Oklahoma City.
I love the way children were invited to participate.
Mm-hmm.
And you're reminding me, when I was a little boy, the American Museum of Natural History wanted to build a life-size replica of a blue whale, which is roughly 80 feet long, I think.
Yes.
And because they were creating this new tribute to the ocean creatures, and they wanted this whale to be the centerpiece. And I absolutely threw in nickels and dimes and the occasional quarter to this funding drive.
That's right.
So that we little kids in New York would feel that whale was
That's right.
partially
That's
ours.
right.
And this, talk about who is ours and who isn't, this is Inky the cat, who has taken to the fact that we are sitting here having a
it's his table.
Yes, we're only living around
We're borrowing it.
Yes. But thank you for the story of the elephant and your first book.
But as a result, then, I fulfilled a dream that I'd had. And I know so much the importance of what it is to have a dream and have that dream come true. It wasn't a bestseller, but it was enjoyed by all who read it.
I'm actually curious how you published it.
We published through a company in Oregon.
Okay.
This was before the day of Amazon or anything like that.
Okay.
So 2005, it's pretty early on. And they did a wonderful job. The artwork was done by a art student at the University of Oklahoma, so she could have something to put in her
Yes.
resume.
Yes.
And as a result, it sold a few dozen, but
I'm actually wondering if it's still around. Do you have a copy here at the Stroud Public Library, perhaps?
I don't think so. I'll have to double check that. I reprinted it at one point because that company went out of business.
But you had the rights to that.
But I went back and I got a storyteller here in Oklahoma. But
Mm-hmm.
she'd actually been one of those children that had raised money
Yes.
as a little child.
Yes.
And so she did some charming little drawings for it, and we republished it. So it's available on Amazon at this point.
Awesome.
But an elephant hips are expensive talks about, they did a graph.
Mm-hmm.
We've bought the head, we've bought the ears, we've got the back.
Oh.
But when it got back the hip area, giving kind of slowed down a little bit. And so in the local paper, the headline said, "Elephant hips are expensive." And I saw that and I thought, oh, what a great title.
I think that's beautiful. And of course, you've written more books since.
Yes.
What was your
Yes.
second?
Oh, my second book was a biography of my mother. She had raised 10 children, 2 marriages. The first one was terrible. But she had suffered and survived. And she had published 3 or 4 books of poems.
So she was an author.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I really wanted to do something. She had died 10 years before.
Okay.
And it really took me about 10 years before I could really begin to think about what I might want to do to memorialize her.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, what better way than to tell her story, the things that she had suffered and the things she'd gone through, her faith, and share some of the poems that people had just loved so much.
Wow.
In her writing, because she did a regular column for a newspaper in
She was a
southwestern
columnist.
Oklahoma,
Oh my
or
goodness.
southwestern Missouri. She had done poems and been in the papers, won
Wow.
minor awards and everything for her poems. So it was my way of just finally saying, okay, she lived, she was here, she was my mother, and she was something else.
So you're the daughter of an
Yeah.
author as well as an author yourself. I think that's fantastic.
But then I went on, I did a series, of course, being a historian, having a history degree, I really, really loved history. But I had a tendency to kind of look under the table, look in the trash. I liked the history that people kind of wanted to sweep under the carpet.
Oh.
Yeah,
They
because
were not comfortable with.
the ladies of the night, the saloons,
Oh, yes.
the gunfighters, the
Yes,
bad
yes,
guys, the people that struggle to make it. And I thought, they lived, and until you hear the story of those ordinary people,
Mm-hmm.
you only have half of the story. And so I discovered that there in the area of where the Myriad Gardens and the big amphitheater is downtown was actually right after the run in Oklahoma.
Yes.
That became known as Hell's Half Acre.
Hell's Half Acre. Okay.
Yeah, Hell's Half Acre was a name that was lifted from a couple of spots down in Texas. Fort Worth was one of them. And that was a place where you could find all the gaming,
Mm-hmm.
all the booze,
Okay.
all the shady ladies,
Yes.
and all the daredevil troublemakers.
Okay.
They all kind of congregated in this one area, and lawmen had a tendency to label that area Hell's Half Acre.
Mm.
And so that entire area was Oklahoma City's Hell's Half Acre. And in that, the very day of the run in April 22nd, 1889, some of the first things that went in across from the railroad station where the train had stopped and the people had come were cafes, gaming halls, saloons.
They wanted to stake their claim right
Because
away.
even though they liked to say that alcohol was illegal,
Mm.
it was still being offered. Because there were always those entrepreneurs who came up from the Indian Territory, where they could get the alcohol there.
Right.
They couldn't bring it into the federally controlled territory, soon to be territory.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was always this runners that would bring in the alcohol. And so there were cities that popped up along the edges of that area that Glenn Shirley, the great Oklahoma historian, he called those the Hell's Fringe, because they were rough and rowdy saloon alcohol-based places.
Wow.
That Stroud was one of those.
Yes, the
Stroud
stories I've
was.
heard about Stroud's early years are.
Yeah, Keokuk was one.
Yes.
There were several, several of those kinds of communities, and so as a result of that, I just thought, oh, those are wonderful stories, and so I began to find some of the stories of some of those, like the first entrepreneurial woman in Oklahoma City.
You've got her story.
Yeah, she was known more formally in papers as Big Annie.
Okay.
She owned and operated several saloons, gaming houses,
Yes.
and bordellos.
Yes.
And she ran them like a business. And she learned by her, the company that she kept included some of the great movers and shakers in the business world and banking world of early Oklahoma City.
Okay.
And so she learned early to buy property.
Okay.
And so she bought real estate. And I have the theory that what she did was she bought that property, sometimes in a different name, but then she made sure that it was rented or taken care of or utilized by someone, and she took a cut of it all.
Okay.
It's the only way to explain some of her financial wealth at the time. And so she was very savvy, very smart.
I was gonna say yes.
And so she became known as Big Annie because apparently she was a tall, large woman. The term becomes very derogatory by the time that in 1908 when she's on trial for, various things that were charged against her.
Wow.
But she was tall. She was blonde. She was of Irish stock. She had. Her story was she had begun her work in Leadville in Colorado and then came to Oklahoma City on the day of the run, and I think she brought some girls with her from Colorado to start her business in the city.
Sure.
And so, the very first business entrepreneurial woman was a shady lady, and you just can't have that. So as a result, I did a book called Hell's Half Acre, Oklahoma City, and then I did another one that talks about the bars and bawds of Oklahoma in the early days, and it's a listing of some of the saloons and places like that were just throughout early day Oklahoma.
I'm so glad you're telling this colorful history, because the world is colorful.
That's right. That's
and
right.
It has characters in it.
Because as wild as those people were, by the time that they're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the run,
yes,
most of those people who'd been involved in all that early stuff didn't want those stories told because they had settled down and they were upstanding citizens.
Of course. But I don't think we should hold people's early years against them. It forms their character, and it makes them strong.
But a lot of those stories are very important because you see people that were living outside the bounds of what society considered normal.
Okay.
You saw the Wild West people who came in, the entertainers who came in to do shows and things like that.
Yes.
And they were living outside that, they were not considered, the top tier of society.
Yes.
You'd go to their shows and be happy to see them entertain you if they're Wild West and that kind of thing.
Yes.
And then another book in that series was Oklahoma Bad Girls.
I think I have a copy of that
Yes.
here at the museum.
And basically what it looks at is it looks at the Gilded Age, the 1890s in Oklahoma Territory. The papers are filled with stories of these desperate, bawdy women that were no good outlaws. There was, Big Annie and Little Britches, Cattle Annie and Little Britches, and they were just two teenage girls, and there were several others that are in that book. One of them, her name was Flo.
Okay.
But she went by another name, and she was known as Tom Quick. And she dressed in men's gear, carried a six-gun, and rode like the wind.
Wow.
And so she was painted as being nothing more than just a prostitute on a horse. But there's a lot more to her story. And if you dig into a lot of the newspapers of that era, you see that the concept of yellow press was very much at play.
Oh.
They weren't acting like what society deemed a young woman should act like.
Sure.
So therefore, she was no better than she should be. And so she was thus ostracized from society. She was a very smart, very clever person.
Mm-hmm.
She escaped 3 times from federal custody.
Oh my gosh.
Twice out of the Guthrie jail, once out of the El Reno federal jail.
Amazing.
And they painted it like that she had used her feminine wiles.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. But the truth is that she just was very able to recognize opportunity. She recognized how to touch buttons and get people to do things or do actions that she could see the consequences of those actions.
So she was strategic.
She was a smart thinker.
Sure.
And as a result, she gets painted as this bigger than life, terrible woman, and finally ends up just disappearing into the shadows of life. But overall, the message of Oklahoma Bad Girls is that it's easy to get a bad reputation, but it's not as easy to get rid of it.
Well.
And with 3 granddaughters, that was a message I really wanted young ladies to hear.
So, what are the messages and stories that you're interested in today that you'd like people to think about today?
Oh, there are some wonderful women in Oklahoma. Even if you just focus just on what we have here in Oklahoma.
Yes.
We have one of the earliest young women to learn to fly. She was a Native American.
One of the earliest female pilots.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And she was a Native American. We have women who did. We had Jerry Cobb, who actually, when John Glenn and that whole group of astronauts were training at that facility in New Mexico to do all these tests.
The early days of the space program.
She was there too.
Doing
she
what?
took the test.
Oh my gosh.
And the only thing that kept her out of that program was a decision that was made not to include a woman.
So we had
she
a
had
woman
a test
who was
pilot.
training to be
She
an
was
astronaut.
a test pilot that had as much hours in the air as any of those men that were taking those tests.
Amazing.
She was well known. She was trusted. She was very skillful.
Wow.
And she took and passed every one of those same tests.
Of course.
But she was left out because of one thing.
Of her gender.
That's right.
I now feel the people who made the movie, The Right Stuff, should be asked about the fact that she's not in that film. There are stories that should be told, and she could have been, hers could have been in that film, and now, well, maybe there's a new film out there to be made.
And
that's quite a story. Wow.
It's Oklahoma, of course, has had a long history with aviation.
Yes.
Like Kansas, big flat areas.
Yes.
We were just a natural, and women were so much a part of the early aviation history. They were barnstormers. In World War II, Jacqueline Cochran actually was asked to put together a group of pilots, female pilots, that could take the place of male pilots that they needed to put into the field, in the air, in the European theater.
Oh, wow.
Because they needed people to move aircraft from one
Oh,
location to another
delivering
location. They
aircraft.
needed people to pull targets behind their planes.
Oh, wow.
There were at least 3 women flying that were killed when the targeting team of artillery on the ground missed.
Oh, no.
So, but you know, they're
So-
unsung heroes. They're unsung heroes. They were actually a part of kind of an auxiliary group in the military, but they couldn't be recognized as such. But that out of that group will come some of the female military groups that emerge. And but those women, they would fly, and they were flying long and big planes, long distances, huge planes. And sometimes they'd land in a base and they couldn't even sleep in the base
No way.
because there was no place for women
Oh, my
on the
God.
base.
Oh, my
And
God.
so they sometimes had to sleep in the plane while they waited for the next day for the plane that they needed to move on to another place,
Yes.
arrived, and they could drive it back, pilot it back.
Yes.
So there's just a lot of those things, and it's Women's History Month, so
It is.
it's really good. It's really good, I think, to remember that women have done and continue to do things that are outside the narrow bubble of existence, and that's been our greatest strength, is the fact that women have stepped up and they've seen what needed to be done and they did it.
They did.
They did it.
Do, and they continue to.
How many women in the run here in Oklahoma, that first winter that they spent on their small little farms and ranches that
Yes.
they sometimes had nothing but a tent to live in,
Yes.
and the temperature went terribly, terribly low,
Yes.
and people were dying and freezing, and women were losing husbands and children, but they still continued on.
Yes.
They took up and they continued, and a lot of those early homesteads were actually finalized and brought to reality, not by the men who came with the dream, but the women who came with them. And
You're flashing on one of many favorite movies, but Grapes of Wrath, which I watched again recently, and there's a scene in which Ma Jode is being complimented for being the strength of the family by her husband, and they have a great conversation about the strength of women
That's right.
versus the strength of men not being equal. And I can't remember exactly how she explains the difference, but I'm gonna now have to look for that clip, because she really, and of course the writer, just the and that was a movie of a long time ago, recognizing the contribution of women to keeping us together, to keeping us moving.
That's right. That's
in,
right.
in the darkest of times.
That's right.
Is
One of
super
the-
important.
One of the negative holdovers from the Victorian era
Yes.
is the strong idea that women were inferior, weaker.
Sorry. Yes.
They didn't have the mental capacity to train to be doctors or anything like that. I mean, that's what they were told. They did not have the mental capacity
Wow.
to take that kind of training.
Wow.
And there were several women who just flaunted in the face of that, going to classes as just looking on from the gallery and learning everything the male people did, and then taking that knowledge out and going and doing something with it. But that holdover that women are weaker, there's a good part to that, because of the fact that, in a relationship, people should treasure and care for each other, but not to the point to where that you've created a situation where you have someone who's treated as a child. When I first got married, I was actually pregnant and had a little baby, a little boy about a year old, in the carrier, in the stroller.
Yes.
And with the community in which I lived, I went to the library because I love the library. It's
Yes.
I always find the library.
I can tell.
And so as a result, I want to get a library card. I fill it out, take it to the desk, and they say, well, is your husband here?
Oh no.
And I say, no, he's at work. He said, well, he'll have to sign this form.
Wow.
And I'm going, he'll have to do what? You know, she said, I said, why? I'm a married woman. I have obviously children. And she said, well, somebody's got to be responsible. And I said, what do I look like?
That's amazing. She literally, or the rules that she was working under, literally did not treat women
That's
as
right.
being capable of having the responsibility to have a library card.
That's right. That's right. And that was 1974 in Kansas.
Oh my goodness.
And it was a privately owned public library. You know, it was open to the public, but it was owned privately. So it had its own set of rules.
Well, okay.
And they could kind of do that. And they are now under government. You know, the city owns the library now.
Okay.
But at that time, it was like, whoa, which is really strange because once I discovered the library, I loved it. It was a wonderful place to go.
Yes.
It was just great. But all growing up, the only library I knew was the one that was in the corner of our classroom.
Classroom library. Oh, I remember classroom libraries.
And we went on a field trip one time in the third or fourth grade, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And we went to the children's room, and it was like, I didn't know this place was here. You've been keeping this from me.
Yes. Yes, let me out of the classroom. Show me the full spectrum. And
That's
there it
right. So
was.
so the next time that I got the chance, I walked in there into the big library.
Yes.
And it was just beautiful. It was an old Carnegie library, so it had the big vaulted, domed ceiling and these huge wooden banisters. And it was just gorgeous. It was like a temple of knowledge.
Oh, wow.
And I just loved that. And, you know, I've been in love with libraries ever since. But that was a bit of a abrupt disappointment to me.
Well, I'm trying to recall when was it that women were even allowed to have their own credit cards. I'm pretty sure that wasn't until sometime in the 1970s.
Yeah, it was sometime in the 70s,
And this whole, of course, women's right to vote was the suffragette movement, but the ultimate, we are all created equal vision of America, although they did, of course, start with all men are created equal, but the evolution of our society is part of what America is. So even if the first documents said all men, eventually it's like, we get it, that's what they wrote, but it's really all people. It's like, actually, Star Trek was, in the first series, the narration at the beginning was, and boldly going where no man has gone before. And then when they reinvented the show for the next generation, they changed the narrative to be where no one has gone before.
Right.
Because they corrected, they improved.
Well, we need to remember, talking about the spirit of America.
Yes.
The spirit of America came from individuals who felt constrained and restricted and impoverished and chained in other cultures, where there was no opportunity for them. There was no possibility for them to make decisions for their own. They had to get approval for everything that they did.
Yes.
And
all authority eventually went back to the king.
You couldn't think for yourself. You couldn't think for yourself. You couldn't even have a religion that was your own, apart from the government religion.
Yes.
And so those were the things that people
were rebelling against.
Yeah, and they came across a cold and dangerous northern Atlantic route in order to find and claim a hope and a dream that we can do something better. We can have freedom. We can have liberty. We can have independence. We can have a place where we can plant our dreams and see them grow and flourish. Now, sometimes we've had a bunch of weeds come up occasionally.
Weeds happen.
But it's an ongoing process. But we've got to, it's like my father always said, measure twice and cut once.
Yes.
when you don't go back and measure yourself against where you were, and that's why history is so important. So
measure
you can go back.
yourself against where
You
you
can
were.
go back and say, oh, okay, well, that was what it was like. And this is what we've become. Are we going over this way a little bit? Are we going over this way? Let's kind of
Measure twice.
pull it back, and put it in that same measurement. And we don't do that often enough. We see things and we imagine and we apply a lot of filters to it that don't have anything to do with what really happened in history. And we like to believe things in history that never happened. I grew up, you grew up, most of us grew up with the story of George Washington never telling a lie.
I knew you were.
He cut down that cherry tree and he could
admitted
not
it.
even tell the lie that to save him from getting in trouble. Well, that was a total falsehood. But why was it important for that concept to be shared with generations of school children? It's because we wanted to produce people that had basic, strong values, that were truthful, were honest, were noble.
Yes.
And so we gave them heroes to emulate, to try and instill and create those kind of values in the citizens that we
Yes.
had.
Yes. I'm so clear that the values, the pioneer spirit, the founding fathers, the people who, as you say, took that very difficult voyage, and of course the first winters here were pretty devastating as well.
That's right.
That's right. There's a strength that we can draw from, and we should do that.
That's right. That's right.
We should acknowledge
And
it,
those
we
are
should do
those are just our founding people.
Yes, and then
You
of
know,
course, we've had-
when you start talking about, shall we say, the immigrant groups, whether they came here enforced as bond servants, enslaved as slaves,
yes,
or they came because they had been found guilty in a foreign court and it was either death
yes,
or departure, they came.
yes,
And they too, they faced different kinds of problems. They didn't have to face the harsh native populations that the first ones did, that were a little upset that these strangers had come in and
yes,
you know,
acted like they owned the place.
yeah. But they did have to face a lot of the challenges that comes from people thinking with fear that we don't have enough jobs, we don't have enough houses,
Discrimination.
we don't have enough, you
for
know,
employment.
right,
Yeah.
or because of the way that they had been raised,
Yeah.
you weren't the right religion, you didn't have the right skin color, you didn't speak English the way that they did. All of these things became their own set of obstacles and challenges that they had to face, they had to overcome, and they just added the wonderful textures of their experiences to that earlier experiences, and just made the whole picture so much broader and richer and deeper. And that's the spirit of America.
Yes.
All of those strands coming together, of following hope and following dreams, and trying to see and make a better future, not just for them, not just for themselves, but to make it for their neighbors, the stranger, everyone, so that everyone would be able to enjoy the same beautiful dream as they did. So when I think of the spirit of America, that's what I think about. All those strands that come together and create this wonderful tapestry of experiences and stories and cultures and history and experiences. And that's just amazing.
Well, you have a take on our nation's spirit that I love and that resonates with me. I know my parents were born here, but their parents came in the great immigration wave of roughly 1915, and it was a struggle to arrive here not speaking the language and having to find some way to make ends meet. And I just feel the nation has always benefited from that survival, that commitment, that passion for a better life, and we can learn from that.
That's right.
We should be looking to, because again, it is a core strength. You know, life is not meant to be easy. You should work for what you have. Some people have to work less than others, but the idea of work is central.
That's right.
We should not want to be given things for free, like as if we are entitled to a living, unless of course we have difficulties, if we have an accident, and so now we are unable to work, or we have sometimes it may not be a physical accident, but it can be an emotional accident. You can be in a war, and you wind up with what they call post-traumatic stress syndrome, or years ago it had other names, and so your mind is affected. You should be respected as a human that deserves a good life, even if you are not functioning the way a person who was not in a war zone functions. That's community. That's love. That's accepting people who need help. Not that think they deserve help, but they literally objectively need it. That's what I believe is also key.
And the biggest challenge, and we need to remember that the biggest challenge that people have when they come into a new setting like that is that there is kind of like the process of, you have to leave your other coat at home. You come to the United States, and no matter how rich and how wonderful your culture was, you've now come to a different place.
Yes.
And so we have a tendency as humans, we love to just, keep holding on to stuff that we should let go. And we need to be able to help people, encourage them to, okay, it's all right for you to dream new dreams now. It's okay for you to visualize yourself as, what are you going to be in this new country, in this new society, in this new place? How are you going to enrich this place?
Yes.
And just allow it to come in, just like the wonder of seasonings. You just add additional seasonings, and it just adds to the whole and makes it richer and more unique. And so that's what we need to do. Well, and not get in our little silos, not in our little isolated communities and hug one particular culture, but begin to forge a new common culture. Because the culture that we have here in the United States now, it's not the culture that we had in 1810. It's not the culture that we had in 1865.
No.
It's not the culture we had in 1910 or 1950. It's an evolving thing. And it will depend on how we contribute, how positive our contributions are, as to what it will be in 50 years, 100 years, 200 years.
Well.
And we're at that pivotal point right now where that it's really one generation fading away, a new generation coming on, and they have to face that issue that's faced so many in the past. What am I going to create to make this dream a reality for everyone?
For everyone.
For everyone.
Yes. I say in the museum's entrance that dreams save us, and the only dream that I don't celebrate are dreams that harm others. If your dream is to, be a bank robber and shoot the guard when he tries to stop you, I'm not going to celebrate that dream.
That's right. That's
but
right.
if your dream is to find ways to contribute in some creative adventure or venture, do something that's never been done before, that looks to help others and yourself, there we are.
That's right.
That's the ideal.
We want the
You
dreams,
benefit,
not the
and other
nightmares.
people benefit, and it's a joint result. And you know, I have to go back to Star Trek, because as much as Star Trek loved the cultures of the different planets, they weren't that those the concept was that the cultures all worked together in the they called it the United Federation of Planets.
Yes. Yes.
So they knew that there was strength in diversity, and because you can learn from each, and I can remember episodes where there would literally be like an officer exchange program. On the Next Generation, Commander Riker once served on board a Klingon ship, so that he would really experience their culture directly.
That's right.
And it
That's
was
right.
wonderful to see him adapt, rather than act like he was not going to respect
That's
he was
right.
there to
That's
learn
right.
respect. If he didn't already have it, he was definitely going to have it by the end of his tour of duty in that exchange program.
That's right.
So
That's right.
I wish we would exchange cultures more in a more organized way. I mean, it can happen by chance. Travel and tourism is a great way for it to happen. Just you never know who you're going to meet
That's
when
right.
you travel around.
That's right.
But I wish there would, and I should actually maybe double check with Stroud's high school. How do they teach respect for other cultures, if they do? I don't know what kind of curriculum program that might be. But I think it's great to think of us all being in this world together, and not giving up our cultures, but not thinking that our culture is the be all end all, that everyone should just focus on us.
And this is such a wonderful time, because so much has normalized. Native Americans that were once denied their ability to wear their regalia, learn their language, do their ceremonial dances. They're across the continent, from Canada down to Mexico. That is being celebrated, and it's being shared, and that's just an exciting and wonderful thing to see. And there are so many ethnic groups that they are recognizing the key role that they played, that their people played in the development of their regions, of their areas, of their communities, and just tracking all the wonderful heroics, the wonderful customs, the foods, whatever that they brought in and enriched those areas with. So we have this wonderful palette of experiences and cultures that is a part of what it is to be American.
And Marilyn, you just planted a thought, because here in Stroud we have our annual summer festival, which is coming up in the middle of June. And now, unless I'm missing it, I can't recall Sac and Fox Nation participating in Stroud's Summer Festival. Am I missing something?
Well, I'm not sure that I've seen that. I know they do a lot of events that
on their
own
their
lands and areas. But that might be an area where a partnership and collaboration could be worked on.
I would love to see,
because that would be wonderful to see that integrated
yes.
into everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sparking that.
Well, thank you so much
thought.
for allowing me to come and talk on. And
Marilyn, it's been tremendous, and thank you for being the inaugural guest.
Well, thank you.
And I look forward to our future efforts. And for those who don't already know, and this is on the museum's website, there is a speaker series that Marilyn and I have co-created, and every month there's a different talk. And the next talk is the 12th of April, Saturday, 2 p.m., the Support Your Local Universe Earth Day talk, Marilyn Hudson speaking. And I will be there as her junior partner that day. But April 12th, again, Earth Day month, Support Your Local Universe is the next museum speaker series talk. Thank you all for watching.
Thank you
again for being
Thank
here.
you.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been great.
So
Thank you
much.
so much.